From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. We begin in Pakistan, where the polls are about to close in a general election that has seen renewed attacks by armed groups. At least 31 people were killed and 35 others wounded when a suicide bomber attacked a polling station in Quetta. Despite the military and police presence, a suicide bomber detonated explosives outside after he was denied entry to the building. The attack follows a spate of recent incidents targeting election rallies in which candidates and civilians have been killed. This election is being reported as one of the bloodiest in history. 272 seats are up for grabs in Pakistan's parliament. The race is mainly between three political parties: the Pakistan Muslim League, which is center-right and headed by former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, who is in prison on corruption charges. His younger brother, Shehbaz Sharif, is this year's main candidate for the party. The Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, also a center-right party led by former cricketer turned politician Imran Khan. And the Pakistan People's Party, which is a center-left party and has been in power several times since it was set up in the 1970s by the late Ali Bhutto, grandfather of this year's main candidate, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. To talk more about Election Day in Pakistan, we are now joined live from Lahore by Umair Javed, a journalist and observer in this election. Hello, Umair. Tell us, how has the polling been and what effect has the violence had on the turnout?
So polling has generally gone smoothly in most parts of Pakistan. Voter turnout, although has not been as high for a number of reasons. Security risks have obviously, sort of diffused voter enthusiasm. We haven't seen as many people come out to the polls as we did in 2013. Obviously, the tragic incident in Quetta has been the headline event so far from polling day. But other than that, people have sort of come out in small numbers, and we expect that overall turnout will be close to around the 45 to 50% mark.
So who do you think will win these elections, or at least who will win the highest number of votes?
So I think the highest number of votes and the highest number of seats, I think it's hard to predict at this point, because all the survey data and opinion polls in the run-up to the election showed that the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz and the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf were sort of fairly neck and neck. However, most analysts believe that Imran Khan's party will end up as the largest party in parliament. They've been buoyed by a good campaign and also have been helped by the fact that the opposition has been plagued by corruption scandals that has seen its former prime minister being convicted and being sent to prison. So there's a good chance that the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf ends up as the largest party in parliament.
So what will be the biggest challenges for the new government in Pakistan?
So I think the first and foremost challenge right now is to avert the balance of payment crisis that Pakistan is currently experiencing. Foreign currency reserves have been declining rapidly for the last 1 year, and Pakistan is currently negotiating with the IMF for a bailout. So the economy is obviously right there on the top of the agenda. And also because of the uptick in recent violence around the elections, which have, again, as you correctly pointed out, have added a great deal of tragedy to the elections. I think that becomes another challenge that the next government would have to deal with. The Islamist insurgency, while it is fairly weak compared to what it was 4 years ago, still needs to be tackled. And I think the security situation is something that the next government will certainly have to take on. So I think between the economy and domestic security, I think these are the two priority areas that the new government faces.
Thank you very much, Umair, for your time.
Thank you.
Now we go to another story. The former Colombian president Álvaro Uribe has resigned as a senator. The move came after the Supreme Court of Justice said he would be investigated for bribery and fraud. Another lawmaker from Uribe's Democratic Center Party, Álvaro Hernán Prada, has also been linked to the case. "I feel morally impeded from being a senator," the former president said on Twitter. But some say this could be a maneuver by Uribe to have the case passed from the Supreme Court to the public prosecutor, which could be more favorable to him. Uribe was president from 2002 to 2010.
La Corte Suprema de Justicia The Supreme Court of Justice has collected evidence that justifies the opening of a formal investigation against Congressman Álvaro Uribe Vélez for the crimes of bribery and procedural fraud.
The case against Uribe relates to accusations that he promoted right-wing paramilitary groups during Colombia's armed conflict. The president-elect Iván Duque expressed his solidarity with Uribe and said he is positive that the former president is innocent.
We are witnesses of the honor, his integrity, his patriotism, and unquestionable service to the country and the rule of law.
Uribe has also been linked to the case known as false positives. Now the Special Jurisdiction for Peace has called close to 2,000 members of the army to appear in court for this investigation. This is the third case opened by the Special Court. Officials have said this is a priority investigation due to the number of military personnel involved and also because of their high rank.
The Truth Commission for the Special Jurisdiction for Peace will investigate the killings by state agents as battle casualties during the internal conflict in Colombia, known as the judicial false positives. These took place before the signing of the peace agreement in December 2016.
The investigation will open a legal procedure regarding deaths presented as battle casualties by state officials. The Commission for Truth Recognition will hear the voluntary reports and make the necessary decisions afterwards.
The reports presented by the prosecutor of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace confirm that severe violations to human rights occurred in 29 of the 32 Colombian departments. The most critical years were between 2002 and 2008, when 1,944 members of the public forces were reported to be involved in the case of false positives.
Heads of the public forces and high-rank military members were involved in this. They might have had an important role in those events. According to the prosecutor's office, there is evidence of how military forces learn how to commit a murder and make it look like a battle casualty. This knowledge was passed from one military unit to another throughout their careers.
The victims' lawyers have said it is important that the JEP reveals how the military went unpunished. If not, they will call for help from international organizations.
The defenders and representatives of the victims of extrajudicial executions want the help of the International Court of Justice. We are sure that they will do something about this, and it seems like people from Congress haven't understood that yet. They approve laws that make it difficult to know the truth of the so-called false positive case.
Meanwhile, the Soacha mothers are waiting for high-rank military officials to appear in the Special Jurisdiction for Peace court to learn who ordered those crimes against humanity.
We hope that these military members really say who gave the order to commit those crimes.
They believe that public officials must go to trial to find the truth about the extrajudicial executions.
Apart from the military, police and forensic medicine members and President Juan Manuel Santos, who was the Minister of Defense in Álvaro Uribe's government, must also be investigated.
In the coming weeks, the Truth Commission of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace will decide who of the 1,750 military men will be called to testify.
Still in Colombia, the murders of 3 more social leaders were reported on Tuesday, taking the total this year to 137. One of those killed was identified as Libardo Moreno, 78 years old, who was shot numerous times in the municipality of Jamundí. The crime was committed at midday on Monday. Over 442 social leaders have been murdered since January 2016. In recent weeks, various indigenous and campesino communities have been the targets of these killings and death threats. Human rights activists in these areas have become the main targets of armed groups battling for control of the drug trade and strategic resources. Campaigners and opposition groups say the implementation of peace in Colombia is at risk as this terror spreads in the countryside.
The threats never cease, but at one point they were less intense and at times. But for the last month and a half, there has been a substantial increase in threats.
In the north of Cauca, there has always been this anxiety, this fear of dying in the streets, in the towns, in the country. Today the phantom of death has awakened once again.
We'll take a short break now, but join us again after a video from our multimedia team. Welcome back. On Tuesday, the president of Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, spoke with Patricia Villegas in an exclusive Telesur interview about the situation in his country. The president said that the U.S. lawmakers have had their eye on countries of Latin America.
How this congressmen, these senators, clearly show Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. They are the three jewels of the crown right now, to say it somehow. They are pointing this out. So then part of the initiative is first of all to look for financing for these groups, and this financing comes with the government of the States.
Ortega also told Telesur that the attempt to overthrow his government has now been defeated and that new agreements are needed to consolidate peace. However, he said that justice must be sought for victims of the violence.
Even though that you've said in this interview that you're willing to speak with the business owners, with the Catholic Church, do you also ensure to look for justice in the midst of all these events? Of course I do. Of course I do, because justice must always be there. You cannot get a life back, but justice can at least be a sign that will help families of the victims to feel somehow better.
4 months after the assassination of Brazilian councilwoman Marielle Franco and her driver Anderson Gomes, 2 men have been arrested. They're suspected of carrying out the killings to silence Franco, an outspoken lawmaker and activist in Rio de Janeiro.
A former police officer and a former firefighter, now suspects of killing councilwoman Marielle Franco. Alain Nogueira and Luís Cláudio Barbosa had been arrested by Rio de Janeiro's police before in connection to 2 other assassinations of police officers. But a witness led investigators to connect the 2 men with Franco's murder. The authorities now believe they belong to a local militia group, although one of the men's lawyers says his client has an alibi.
With regards to the involvement with Marielle's case, there's only one witness implicating my client in this event. He wasn't there. We even have documents proving his non-involvement at the moment of the crime.
This is one of the few developments in the case 4 months on. Marielle Franco and her driver were brutally murdered in a drive-by shooting on March 14th in downtown Rio. Human rights groups and Franco's family have repeatedly criticized the lack of answers by the authorities over these 4 months.
What leaves me sadder is the silence we have to live with. It has been almost 4 months. For a mother, it is very difficult. Every day, every minute, we ask, who killed Marielle and why?
4 months later, we can see that the institutions of the justice system are inefficient, incompetent, and are not committed to the correct solution in this case.
Marielle Franco, 38, was a black city council member who grew up in Rio's favelas. She was a hard critic of police violence targeting black and poor communities in the city. And she was also running for Rio de Janeiro's council office. Her death prompted nationwide anger and disbelief, and the suspicion that her death was politically motivated. Local media have even reported that Rio's mayor, Marcelo Siciliano, hired her killing, although he has repeatedly denied the accusation. We still don't know who killed Marielle Franco, but we do know that this case reveals the complexity and depth of the criminal scene in Rio, where the borders between police, politics and militia are very transparent, and everyone who crosses it risks being silenced. Marielle Franco did it anyway to protect her communities, and because of that, she became a symbol against police violence in Brazil. Mi Alberti, Telesur in São Paulo.
Still in Brazil, the movement of small campesino producers has organized its own national summit, this time to debate the fight for the freedom of the former president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Members of the campesino movement will gather to plan new protests to defend democracy. The activity will take place in the Paulo Freire Training Center of the Landless Movement in the city of Caruaru, in the state of Pernambuco. They also ratified their support for Lula da Silva's candidacy for the coming presidential election. U.S. President Donald Trump is pressing Mexican President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador to speed up talks on NAFTA. López Obrador's nominated Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard read a letter sent by Trump in which the U.S. President urges Mexico's upcoming government to accelerate negotiations on the renewal of the trade agreement.
I believe a successful renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement will lead to even more jobs and higher wages for hard-working American and Mexican workers, but only if it can go quickly, because otherwise I must go a much different route.
Still in Mexico, a forensic team in Ciudad Juárez buried 40 unidentified bodies, most of them killed by violence. They were buried in a public pantheon property of the Northern Mexican City Council. According to authorities, relatives are afraid to claim the bodies of their loved ones. In the state of Chihuahua, 14% of the bodies that enter the forensic center are not identified. Most of their deaths are related to violence linked to drug trafficking.
The bodies come from suspicious deaths, violent deaths, whether they are people who have been run over, different types of murders, concerning social neglect. Even though we may not have thought so, some come from hospitals and the family members don't reclaim the bodies.
Another journalist has been murdered in Mexico. Rubén Pat was shot dead in Quintana Roo State. 8 journalists have been killed in Mexico this year. Our correspondent Pablo Perez brings us more.
Well, with the murder of 2 more journalists last week, the death toll rises up to 8 so far this year. The last case is the one of Rubén Patkawich, a reporter from Ciudad del Carmen, Quintana Roo. It's a touristic resort where he worked covering mainly security and crime issues. He was said to have been under state protection because of threats that he had received related to his line of work, but as in many other cases, many other journalists were under state protection, and that did not deter their murders. Let's remember that Mexico is considered to be one of the most dangerous places to be a journalist, with well over 110 journalist murders since the year 2000, 45 of them alone during Enrique Peña Nieto's administration.
Pablo Perez from Mexico City. An Honduran migrant child has finally been reunited with his family in the United States after more than a month. 11-year-old Abisai was separated from his parents by U.S. immigration officials. The family has said they feel joy and relief now that they are together again, but also outrage on the U.S. treatment against immigrant children. They also fear they won't be able to remain in the country. A U.S. court asked the government to reunite more than 2,500 migrant children separated from their parents at the southern border by Thursday. Chilean Archbishop Ricardo Esati has been called to appear in court for allegedly covering up sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. Esati will appear in court on August 21st, accused of concealment. Prosecutors believe he covered up a network of 14 priests who systematically abuse minors. Esati, the capital's archbishop, has denied any wrongdoing and said he will cooperate with authorities. 158 members of the church are currently under investigation over sexual crimes. Social activists in Chile have joined the protest to support Mapuche leader Celestino Córdoba and to demand the government respects the rights of indigenous people. Members of the Mapuche community gather outside the hospital where leader Machi Celestino Córdoba said he will begin his dry hunger strike. He is demanding the government of Sebastián Piñera to allow him to leave the Temuco prison for 48 hours to renew his spirituality in an ancestral ceremony. A drone has captured new images of the tide of plastic waste engulfing the main beach of Dominican Republic capital city, Santo Domingo. Footage shows the remaining trash floating in the Caribbean coast, a touristic hub known for its paradise beaches. More than 500 public workers have been collecting piles of plastic sacks for a week. So far, some 60 tons of plastic have been cleaned out of the sea. It is estimated that every year between 5 and 13 million tons of plastic end up in the oceans. We'll take one last short break, but join us again after a video from our multimedia team. Thanks for joining us again. Leaders from the BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa are meeting in Johannesburg for the group's 10th summit. This year's summit is expected to mainly revolve around trade war triggered by high tariffs imposed to a number of countries by United States President Donald Trump. The leaders of the emerging economies wish to work together to promote multilateral global trade and fight protectionism. They are also expected to bolster BRICS' financial institution, the New Development Bank. China and South Africa have pledged to continue their friendship and build ties with each other. The statement comes after bilateral talks between Chinese President Xi Jinping and his South African counterpart Cyril Ramaphosa in Pretoria. The two leaders also agreed to strengthen high-level exchanges, deepen political mutual trust, align their development strategies, promote practical cooperation, and increase people-to-people exchanges. President Xi is in South Africa to attend the 10th BRICS Summit starting Wednesday. Now let's take a look at other news from around the world.
A series of suicide attacks were carried out by the Islamic State in the Syrian city of Quetta and its surrounding countryside, killing at least 38 people and wounding others, according to the state media. One attack targeted the Al-Squad area and 2 others were reportedly killed before they could self-detonate. Former Catalan leader Carles Puigdemont is to return to Belgium with his family. Spain's Supreme Court dropped an arrest warrant for him after Germany refused to extradite Puigdemont for declaring Catalan's independence last year, an act that Spain qualifies as rebellion.
We have always been ready to meet and talk with everybody, including the Spanish government, if necessary. It gives us a very strange impression when we see that the government was ready to meet and sit down with the ETA armed group while they rejected a meeting with us, though we are advocating for our cause democratically.
Japan is experiencing an unprecedented heat wave. 65 people have died of the heat stroke and more than 22,000 have been hospitalized. The weather agency is now classifying the weather and its aftermath as a natural disaster, according to the Fire and Disaster Management Agency. Among those killed was a 6-year-old schoolboy who collapsed on his way back from a field trip.
And with that, we come to the end of this news brief. But there's another stories, as you know, you can find on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.